People that have experienced trauma will see through your bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to know if you're fake.
Fire, earth, wind, water. This is the Elemental Educator. And now your host, Tyler Como.
Hello and welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, and today we have a special guest ready to empower you. Joshua Stamper is the Director of Innovation for the Teach Better team, a multifaceted role that encompasses his talents as an author, podcaster, leadership coach, and educational keynote speaker. With a rich background as a middle school administrator, classroom art educator, and athletic coach, Joshua brings a wealth of experience to his work in education. Joshua is passionate about implementing trauma-responsive techniques, exploring alternative student discipline methods, and promoting healthy leadership habits. He is deeply committed to enhancing leadership capacity through self-care practices, ensuring that educators are equipped to lead with empathy and resilience. As the author of Aspire to Lead and host of the popular podcast of the same name, Joshua continues to inspire and empower educators and leaders worldwide. Welcome to the Elemental Educator podcast, Joshua. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Oh my goodness, Tyler, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and to so many others.
The pleasure is all mine. And I want to jump right in and just start with unpacking. How did you get to where you are now?
Oh goodness, that's a very long and bumpy road. So as a student growing up, I hated school. I didn't want to go, didn't want anything to do with it. So it's funny. And my mom today still laughs that I am in education as, I was, like you said, a teacher, a coach, dean of students, and an administrator, mostly at the middle school level, and did that for about 20 years. But originally out of college, I was a graphic designer. I loved art. I loved athletics also. Those were my two passions growing up, and truly was the only reason I went to school were for those two subjects. So doing graphic design for 3 years, we hit the recession, and unfortunately, I was newly married. We were about to have a daughter, Mila, my oldest, and I was told that my job was dissolving in 2 weeks. And so I had to frantically figure out, what on earth am I going to do? So I really leaned hard into my two passions, so art and coaching or sports. And so went back to school to get my teaching license. So during that time, I was a paraprofessional at a middle school and then also a senior high at just working with kids. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. I loved the opportunity to do that role, and in fact, almost switched over to special education, but stayed true to my passions, and then ended up as a middle school art teacher and coach. And so I coached football, basketball, and track in addition, which is a weird combination, I know, an art teacher as a coach, but it really worked because I went one morning to go get coffee. It was real early, right before football practice, and I was attacked. And I'm very purposeful in that terminology because I was really just wanting caffeine. And my assistant principal had another idea in his mind. He just came out of nowhere and said, "Hey, I see what you're doing on our campus. Have you ever thought about being a principal?" And honestly, that question changed the trajectory of my future forever. And I'll be honest, I laughed at him. I wasn't prepared for the conversation or that thought, but I was like, "No, I'm just learning." It was like my third year in teaching. I just figured out how to be a classroom teacher, how to coach. What are we talking about here? But I took that to heart, came back to my wonderful wife, and she just empowered me. She was like, "Yes, I totally see it. It makes sense. I really think you should lean into this." So I did. And a couple months later, I was in a program, a master's program for my administrative degree. And then I just kind of took off from there and just tried to be a sponge and just learn as much as possible, get as much experience. And I just had amazing administrators that gave me that opportunity. And within a couple of years, I was in the administrative role as a dean of students. And man, it was just like my pants were on fire, man. I did not understand truly the role. I thought I did, but it's different when you're in that chair. And I was an assistant principal for almost 10 years and did that with fidelity and loved it. I was in 2 different districts, 3 different schools, and I got the call to do something else, which is where I'm currently at with Teach Better. I've been doing that for 2 years, and Director of Innovation is my title. And yeah, I now provide PD all over the country and trying to help other either aspiring or current leaders and trying to help them, like you were talking about earlier, just trying to make sure that they're feeling inspired and empowered.
That's such a great story. And you know what? arts and athletics, they actually kind of go hand in hand because they
For
both
sure.
require that creativity. I'm not surprised you're a director of innovation because, again, that's the art, the athletic side. You have to be innovative and creative to be good at sports and to be good in the arts.
I think
So
so.
again, no surprise there. Now, I am curious though. You, with intention, chose to go to education
Mhm.
where arts and athletics don't necessarily have to be connected in an educational setting. Why did you choose the education world?
Honestly, I wanted to change it. I wanted to make it different than the experience that I grew up in. Like I said before, I did not like school. I felt like a lot of it was sit down, shut up, and do what I say. And that was not an environment that was conducive for my learning style or me as a human being. I move constantly. That's part of why I love athletics. Also, don't like to be told what to do. I like to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And so, having to be in this really tight environment that a lot of times I didn't feel connected with what I was going to do in the future. And honestly, I wasn't wrong. There was a lot of stuff that I learned and had to do that didn't connect with anything, and it still doesn't. But eventually, I learned to play the game. So that was kind of my overarching piece. Was like I wanted to be the teacher that I wanted. I wanted to be the teacher that you're running into the classroom versus running out. And I was the kid that ran home as quickly as possible to jump on video games or go to the park with my friends or do whatever that was not school related. So for myself, it was just like trying to be the teacher that connected with their students, but also had a fun learning environment where they could appreciate something that I love dearly, which was art. And then, of course, athletics. There were so many impactful coaches in my life. Growing up, it was kind of a tumultuous, like a very emotional, kind of crazy home life. And so having that chaos, I felt very natural to be on a sports setting where I could just kind of like get away from that. And my coaches just fed into me as a person, as a young man. And because of those influences, I wanted to do the same thing, growing up, is to be that light for some other child and go beyond just the pitch, right? Because I played soccer for 20 plus years. So like for myself, I knew the importance of being a mentor or being someone that could be there to provide wisdom for someone that potentially is struggling. So yeah, definitely some of the influences in my life, even though that environment wasn't conducive to me, was extremely impactful. And I just kind of wanted to model that moving forward.
And I've actually found there are a lot of people that get into education because they didn't have a good experience in education themselves and they want to be a part of the change.
Yep.
That roots in such a powerful movement. It builds this really, really strong earth and it allows you to have determination along the way and it allows you to get some grit and push through some of the harder times. Now, Joshua, earth represents the core values and rooting yourself in your beliefs.
Mhm.
How have your personal core values guided your journey from that struggling student to the influential leader in education you are now? And how are you manifesting these in your work?
Yeah, I know my teachers didn't see this in me. There were a lot of terms of like you're wasting your potential, or you don't care about school, and there were a lot of like negative things that were pushed on me as a child. For myself, though, I feel like when I have a certain goal, I am extremely determined, like you used that word before, and driven to accomplish what I want. And so for myself, that was the turning point in my educational career. Was actually a person that told me something I couldn't do, which was my counselor in high school, Mr. Lake. So I was brought into his office. He literally had my grades on his desk when I walked in, and he just was like, "Hey, where do you want to go to college?" That's how he started the conversation. And I told him Bethel College. It's now Bethel University in Minnesota, St. Paul, and it's a private college. And he chuckled and was like, pointed to my grades and was like, "You can't get into that college." And then he was asking like, "Why do I want to go there?" So I gave him a litany of reasons. I had visited the campus. I knew of it from some other influences in my life, and so really it came down to the point where he started to get extremely annoyed by the fact I just kept pushing that I wanted to go there. And he finally started to raise his voice to finally yelling and saying that I would never get into any college. I would never get into that college, a public school, or probably even a community college based on my grades. And that stuck with me even to this day. I still feel like I'm trying to prove this as far as like this persona that was pushed on me. And so when I left that office, I was very emotional and very angry. And I just was like, no, I'm going to prove them wrong. And I did. I got into that school and barely got into that school, but I got in that school and changed, how I was going to play the game. I knew school was a game. I knew if I did these certain things that I could excel and get to where I wanted. So that determination, that drive, I proved it. And so I got in that college. I graduated in 4 years, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what I was able to accomplish. Same thing with being an administrator. It's not easy to become an administrator, especially when you're an art teacher. I had to prove myself quite a bit to get into that role as far as, the directors and whatnot. So for myself, it was like, there were a lot of people telling me, you're too young, you don't have the experience, fill in the blank as to the excuses as to why I shouldn't or could not obtain that position. And I was determined and driven to prove them wrong. So I feel like, and I wrote about this in my book, Aspire to Lead, quite a bit too, of just these trials and tribulations, and really having to feel like I had to prove myself. But once I have a goal in mind, watch out, because I feel like I'm going to get there.
I resonate with that message so much. I've been told very similar things in my path. And again, like you, one of my favorite things to be told by somebody is, you can't do that.
Yep.
Watch me.
Yep.
watch me. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes I fail miserably along the way, but that's where we learn from the most. And that's the drive. That's the determination. You can do anything that you want to put your mind to. Now, something we haven't unpacked yet, though, is your experience as a foster parent. And this has undoubtedly shaped your approach to education.
Oh, yeah.
How have these personal values influenced your implementation of trauma responsive techniques in schools?
Yeah. So my first year as an administrator, I worked in North Dallas, and I went from being a teacher and a coach in a pretty affluent school to going to another campus in a community that the problems and things that they were dealing with were far different. And so getting on that campus, I was tasked, and really, unfortunately, I was pushed to do three things. It was provide detention, in-school suspension, or out-of-school suspension. And for a lot of kids that were going through really, really traumatic and tough situations, that didn't work. It was just punish, punish, punish. And so, when I walked in, the teachers were like, essentially, they wanted me to be the sheriff. They wanted me to come in and be the hammer. And I did that. I did exactly what they wanted. And the data was showing that I was not making any difference. In fact, the data showed that I was actually getting worse. And I was extremely frustrated. I was getting to the point of almost depression, to the like walking away from education as a whole and administration, because I was like, I'm such a failure. I wanted to be Superman. I wanted to put the cape on and save the day. And unfortunately, it was going backwards. And so right in the same time frame, my wife and I started to become foster parents. So at the time, we had two biological children, wanted to expand our family and serve in that way. We had to go through quite a bit of training. For those who don't know, you have to go through extensive amount of, not only do they come through like your personal life and your past and all these other things to make sure you're a safe environment, but they also require you to do quite a bit of training to make sure that you're prepared to bring a child into your home. With that training was through Professor Purvis of TCU. She was amazing and had a trauma-based relationship kind of systematic approach to things. And what I noticed going through this training was that with TBRI, it's all about like really de-escalating the child and being with them. So for instance, like as a parent, in a loving home, you can do timeout, right? A kid does something wrong, go to your room, do timeout. Well, with a student with trauma or a kid with trauma, what that's saying is, I don't want you near me, go away, right? That's the message that they're seeing, because obviously there's a fractured relationship that they've experienced. How they're interpreting things is probably different. So what she was talking about is like a time in, where you're keeping the child with you. Now there's still a consequence there. They're not able to play and do whatever their activity they were doing prior to when they made the poor decision, but they're still taking a break. They're de-escalating, but they're with you. So they're still feeling that connection, right? Big difference. However, it's very similar. Well, that's just one aspect of things. Now flip it to the school. Well, what's equating to that? ISS. Go away. Get away from me, right? Go into a room by yourself. And that fractured relationship that's broken. And then, we're talking through all of these different strategies in this training. And I just, every time I heard something different, I kept equating it to going, why are we not doing this in schools? obviously there's research that is here telling me I should be doing something as a parent. And then I'm looking at what we do in schools, and it's far different. So for instance, and I'm going to keep equating it to parenthood, is if my two boys, I have 6 kids. So two of my boys, let's say, are scuffling and they push each other. Okay, go to your room. Well, I'd never send them to a room for 8 hours straight without any breaks. They just have to sit in their room, right? And I never talk to them about it. I never teach them about the behavior moving forward. I just expect them, as soon as they exit their room, they're just magically going to have the skills needed to perform moving forward within that relationship. And we're also not going to talk about the fractured relationship between the brothers. We're just going to pretend it doesn't exist. Does that sound familiar? I mean, that's what we do in ISS, right? Go into this room. You're supposed to build the skills. You're supposed to reflect by yourself. You're supposed to then go into that environment that's fractured. You're supposed to not talk about it. And then we're just hoping that everything's going to magically be better moving forward. Of course not, right? So through that training, through foster care, I was like, okay, I'm determined to research more, find some other like-minded folks, and do different things. And I came to my administrative staff and I was like, look, we have to do something different. The data says that what we're doing right now is not working. So this is asinine. Like, we can't continue to do this. So let's change it. And if we fail, then we know these practices don't work. Let's try something new, right? It can't hurt. And they agreed. And so with that, I built what was a relationship action team with like-minded folks to learn. And I mean, if we want, we can talk further about that. But that was kind of like the starting point of like my mindset was totally changed. And I was just deflated. So I was just at the breaking point of like, we have to change something.
There is so much we can unpack in this whole story. I'll talk maybe about 3 things. One of the first ones is if nobody understands what it's actually like to become a foster parent, it is harder to become a foster parent than it is to just become a parent.
Yep.
You have so many hoops to jump through, and at any time they can come in and, well, at least in Canada, they can come in and quality check your home and make sure that it's still up to the standards.
For sure.
Right. And so you waive a lot of rights when you decide to be a foster parent, because you give up the privacy of your own private home.
Yep.
And that's a bold decision. That's a big risk. It's rooted in something very strong, Joshua, which I really appreciate about you for doing that. So huge kudos there. Talking trauma-informed decisions, trauma-informed strategies, and we could go on for days here. We could have several episodes diving into this. And something that's really important to know is people that have experienced trauma will see through your bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to know if you're fake. They're going to know if it's a one-time thing. You can walk in with the best intention and say, hey, I'm here to build that relationship and bond with you. They're going to put up a wall, and you're going to walk away and say, oh, I gave them my best. How come I didn't get through? Because they've seen it 100 other times, right? You need to show up for at least 3 months before you can start to break down some barriers.
For sure.
Before you can start to do it, because they need to trust you.
Yep.
Right. And exactly as you mentioned, that in-school suspension, the out-of-school suspension is worse.
Oh, yeah.
You need to do that. You need to do that only if it's a safety risk, because now you're totally removing. With an in-school, you can go in and have conversations. You can bring in affected people and have conversations. You can have restorative circle practices and try to really bridge it. So there is value if you do it the right way. But it's been done the wrong way so many times. And when 2 kids get in a fight, what do the parents want?
Never to talk
Why
again.
is he not suspended? Why are they suspended?
Yeah.
The 28 other kids that are in the room, their parents, why are you not suspending these kids? Right? That's a huge, huge pressure from external sources that have a ton of urgency.
Yep.
But they don't have the legitimacy or the authority to see it through. You do. So the change can come from you. And that's what's super important in the message you're sending. You have the ability to do something different, but you're choosing to streamline it in a way that's been proven to not be effective.
Yeah. People don't realize the power that they have especially an administrator. Like, people can recommend stuff, but when it comes down to it, it's your decision. You get to decide, right? So as a campus leader, I just want to empower anyone that's listening. Like, if you want to make change, you have the power to do so. And even if you have a position that you don't think is a title of strength, I would push back on that and say that every educator is a leader, and you can make a huge ripple on your campus or in your district if you're looking to make a difference.
And I want to jump in on that too and say, if you're a classroom teacher, an educator, when you send that kid to the administrator, you lose your power.
Completely.
You lose your authority. you can handle it in your room. Now, if it's very serious and you're not sure, you can consult, but I'm sure that your administrator would appreciate it so much more if you took some power in your classroom,
Yep.
because in the long run, that's going to pay off for you and you're going to have less issues.
Yep.
Because you're establishing that you have the authority. Now, jumping ship, a little segue here a little bit. In your book, Aspire to Lead, how do you communicate the importance of these core values to aspiring leaders? And can you share a core value that you believe is essential for effective leadership?
Oh, for sure. And it probably goes in line with what we're talking about. So Aspire is an acronym, and I won't go through all the terms, but one of them is perseverance, which is the P in Aspire. So, I think in just education in general, just the culture that is rampant is that we talk about failure, but we don't actually embrace it. And I don't mean failure as, oh no, I didn't do something correctly and then just step away for it, right? It's okay, I experienced this and I'm going to move forward to either get the desired result or, I've learned from this and so the next time I do another initiative, I'm going to do it differently based on what I experience. So perseverance, I talked about this, throughout the book and throughout even our conversation today of things that we're going to see. And I mean, I could talk. There's thousands of times that I went into it, and I'll give an example. So, for instance, when I was a art teacher, I was given the opportunity to be the dean of students on the campus. Right, I did it for a full month. They gave me a sub. I walked into my assistant principal's office. A student had done something they weren't supposed to. The assistant principal was like, "Hey, you're going to make the phone call." And she starts to tell me like about the parent. I was like, oh, I got it. Ego kicks in. I want to show off in front of the AP, right? So I get on the phone and she puts on speaker, and within a minute, the guy's telling me that his child's not going to do the punishment and he's going to be on the phone with a lawyer and he's coming up to the school and he's going to talk to the school board. I mean, every threat you can think of. I mean, I was sweating bullets and I was extremely embarrassed because, this conversation is going on with someone that I have a lot of respect for and is my mentor. And I hang up the phone and she's just laughing in the background, just having a good time. And I turn around, I'm like, did you not hear what he's going to do? And she's like, I'll take care of it. So she gets on the phone within minutes. She's smoothed it over. The child's going to serve the consequence. And then I just appreciate this opportunity. It was once she hung up, she was like, what did you learn from that? Right. Well, one, I should have listened to her. She was going to give me the outline of what I needed to say to make sure that the conversation went smoothly. I cut her off. My ego got in the way. And then I had a terrible phone call. Right. But in that, I got to learn. So all that being said is throughout your leadership journey, you're going to look like a fool. You're going to do things incorrectly. You're going to stumble. You're going to fall. And unfortunately, in a leadership position, it typically is public. It's not like you're in your room by yourself, and if you make a mess up on a lesson, it's just with some kids, right? So typically, it's with a lot more people that understand what's going on. So you just have to understand, like, and I use this quote all the time is with Nelson Mandela, and I had this on my board in my office was, "I never lose. I either win or I learn." And I think that quote for myself was kind of just a reminder because so many times when we stumble or we fall as a leader, we start to get down on ourselves, right? And we unfortunately hear so many negative things from students, from parents, from teachers, other people in the district about us and our role that then we start to believe that too. And it's not about winning or losing, it's about learning. That's why we're there, right? And it doesn't go with just the kids, it's about the adults also. I learn and I try to get better every single day. That's my role. But I have to learn that I have to persevere through the tough times because trust me, as a leader, you're going to have a lot of difficult conversations, a lot of things that you experience that you never thought in your wildest dreams would occur on your campus or in your district that you're having to deal with. And that adversity is something that you have to embrace and understand that, okay, it may be tough right now, but I will get through it and I will succeed eventually.
Absolutely. One thing that I wonder about your story, though, and this is a bit of a challenge here. Maybe you can fill some gaps or share some
Sure.
insight on it. I wonder too if your phone call, maybe you said all the right things, but the system set you up for failure because you were not the administrator.
Yeah.
And the parent on the other side has no authority, no respect for the teacher calling, but respect for the administrator calling. And that's been trained over the last several decades that when you hear from the principal,
Yep.
then it's real.
Yeah.
But when you hear from the teacher, it's not. And that's what needs to change. We need
sure.
teachers making those calls more often.
For sure.
Right? We need
Yeah.
teachers having those conversations. So, part of it, great lesson to learn that we could have sat and heard their story a bit and understood the situation a bit more. But it also speaks to why we're doing what we're doing. We need to empower those teachers more so that when that phone call comes, that parent, that person, whoever it is on the other side of the phone, they're not saying, "Oh, I just need to talk to the higher up. I need to hear it from the higher up."
Yep.
Right? So, and even as a district leader, you'll still see that. That's where I'm going to bring my lawyer in. I'm going to go to your state. I'm going to go to your governing body and have a conversation.
Yep.
They still like to jump that hoop. So,
sure.
so no matter what, that's what we're trying to tackle here as well. But with that, we actually talk about another element here. We start to go from the use of our core values and what we root in to how we deal with adversity. And that's where we bring in the air element. So Joshua, can you share, and you did a little bit here, maybe another significant challenge that you faced in your career and how you overcame it?
Oh, goodness. There's been so many. So I think I'll go back to the art teacher piece. When I first started to try to become an administrator as an art teacher, I had folks tell me that, and they did it in a backwards way, but essentially what they're saying is you weren't a real teacher. You were an elective teacher, one that's a fun environment. And you have to prove that, one, you have the teaching strategies that could then translate into being an administrator that provides feedback, but then also, like, what are you doing in your current position to assist that, right? So I didn't feel like I was in the same playing field as a core teacher versus what I was doing, which was an art teacher, which I don't agree with, but that was the system that I was having to deal with, right? And I had everyone from principals to secondary directors had that same conversation with me. So for myself, talking about that determination, right? I was determined to prove that, okay, that isn't true. Just because you think I play with paint in my classroom and do, fun and crazy things, and it's not rooted in state objectives, and I don't use the same teaching strategies as those in the core, I wanted to prove that differently, right? And the feedback piece is, okay, how can I provide feedback to my staff where it's not going to be perceived as me stepping out of bounds? Because I am a peer. I don't have a title. So for myself, what I did was I learned that the district had a system they built, which was these small walkthroughs. So it was anywhere between 3 and 5 minutes to get in the classroom to see what was going on with students. They were requiring every administrator on the campus to get 250 minimum of these small walkthroughs. I asked my principal, and then we asked the district if I could get trained in that, and then also get into classrooms to collect that data, which would then be disseminated to the staff. What I did was like, well, if they're going to get 250 as a teacher, I'm going to get more than that to prove that I'm getting into classrooms, getting the data, and then I will be the one to then disseminate that to the staff. And so that's what I did. And so when I got into that interview, it wasn't about what I was going to do. It was what I had done. Here's the data. The district had it, and they saw, well, that's crazy that this elective teacher is actually getting more walkthroughs than a current administrator, even though they don't have the same amount of time to be able to knock that out. So that's just one example from myself to, whatever your role. I mean, I know it's hard, especially when you're a teacher trying to become an administrator, to prove that you're worthy of that role. But I would just say, get out of your four walls, in that ASPIRE acronym. A is activate. You got to get up, you got to get out, you got to find ways to show that you are impactful not only in your classroom, but you're making a huge impact at the campus level also.
And I'm going to stand up for the electives a little bit here.
Please.
As somebody that's formally taught some phys ed, I know in the province I'm currently in and in the province I was in before, it is a mandatory graduation requirement that you complete your grade 10 phys ed, which is considered an elective in a lot of places. And in order to do that, you have to pass grade 9 phys ed and grade 8 phys ed. The list goes on. The hardest kids I have ever had to deal with were the grade 9 and 10 kids that did not want to do phys ed.
Yep.
And you're fighting with them to change. You're fighting with them to participate. it's a fight left, right, and center. Right. Whereas at least in the core classes, and I can speak from experience here too, because I do teach science as well. And some would argue it's not the English or the math, but it's a core. I'm going to put that out there. It's a core.
Yeah.
It needs to be considered as one. Kids in those classes had more pressure from their parents to do well. They had more expectations. They set higher expectations for themselves. And then when they hit the elective, that was it. This was their time off.
Yep.
Right. So it is a lot harder to be an elective teacher, and the elective teacher actually sees more of the kid.
Oh my gosh.
Because you get to bring out their side, right? Now, in your role as an assistant principal and leadership coach, what strategies have you found to be most effective in helping other educators overcome the adversity they're facing, either in their professional lives or even just their general personal life?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think first off is just asking the question of what's going on in the world and actually listening. There's not too many folks that actually get that from their leadership. I always like to say, when you're an administrator, it feels like you're riding the bike, but everything's on fire. You're on fire. The bike's on fire. And so, as an administrator, we don't get a whole lot of time to actually understand what's going on in the lives of our teachers. And so for myself, I had to make sure that my core values were seen every day and I had touch points. And one of those things was that I wanted to make sure that I had a good, healthy relationship with my staff. And so how was I going to do that? So I did relationship walks, tried to do that as much as possible. I know this is a dirty word for a lot of people, but I had a spreadsheet for marking down when I had an opportunity to connect with them on a personal level, right? So, as an administrator, I think it's extremely valuable to get in, even if it's just a couple minutes, to ask them what's going on in their world. Because just like our students, we talked about the trauma that's going on in the lives of our kids. There's some trauma going on in the lives of our staff too. And we would never know about it because they have a smile on their face. They connect with kids. They do a wonderful job in the classroom as far as making sure that kids are mastering the content. But when you get down to it, you find out, hey, their spouse or partner has lost a job, or they're in an abusive relationship, or they're in a custody battle for the kids. Like just some of the most heart-wrenching stories, or maybe that's a health issue that you weren't aware of, mental or physical. And you start getting to the bottom of things, and then it's okay, this is something where, can I provide resources? Can I provide time? Can I just be a listening ear? So I think as an administrator for myself, it was making sure that I was meeting the needs of our students, but also meeting the needs of our teachers, because they're on the battlefield. They're making the connection points with the kids every single day. And when you have, 1,000 kids, 2,000 kids on your campus, it's hard because as an administrator, there were kids I didn't know on the campus, which is unfortunate. But with the numbers, you may know their name, but you don't know their story. You don't know about who they are in the relationship. Well, the teacher does, right? So it's important to feed into those teachers. They're extremely important. So on the coaching side of things, it's the same thing. It's getting to the bottom of what's the root of the problem, and our teachers are phenomenal. They're super smart folks. Typically they have the answer there. It's just a matter of sitting down, having the time to really identify what the true problem is, what's the root behind it, and what's the solution moving forward. But then also being the resource moving forward in that plan to assist them side by side, right? It's not like, oh, it's your problem, you deal with it. No, and I'm not going to solve it myself. That's a culture shift also that you have to make, is that, okay, if you're coming in with a problem, we're also walking away with a solution. And hopefully you have suggestions prior to the meeting even occurring, because unfortunately, as a young administrator, I talked about being Superman and putting that cape on. I wanted to take everyone's problems and I wanted to solve them all, and I wanted to see it through. And what happened was then I started getting burnt out, and then I'm not good for anyone else moving forward, including my family. So, I had to make that shift of going, I'm trying to be the hero for everyone, and that can't be. I am now going to be assisting side by side in regards to the solution.
So you've gone from hero to sidekick is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I was, instead of Luke Skywalker, I was Yoda.
There we go. There we go. I love that. Now, something really important to note in the message you're sending, as a leader, and teachers, you're leaders, right?
For sure.
You need to create that space, but it's up to the people around you to buy in as well. So when we talk about hearing these things from staff members, you can do all the right things, but they're only going to open up if they're ready.
Yep.
And if they want to. So we can't take it personally that if we've created all of the right spaces, that somebody is still closed off. Mm-hmm. And that's something about trauma. You can do all the right things and still not see that result. And that's going to be okay. We have to come to terms with that. Don't take it personally. They have some work that they have to do before they're ready.
Yeah.
What's very cool about this too is we get to transition again from talking about the adversity to I've asked you about some actions. And this is where we get into the water element and we start to talk about the change process and doing that smoothly and fluidly. So, Joshua, with water representing the ability to implement change, how have you driven meaningful change in your roles? And if we want to, this can particularly be about trauma response strategies, or it can be something else.
Well, I'd love to continue with that conversation just because I'm so passionate about it. But I think the main thing is like whatever your core values are, whatever is your true beliefs, I want you to hold on to that. I talked about, feeling like everything was on fire, and that's true. And you can get caught up in the just craziness of the campus. You can get caught up in the problems. Shoot, you can get caught up in email. Shoot, I could have stayed in my office all day just answering emails because I was getting hundreds a day. So with that, I talked about those touch points. The trauma informed or trauma responsive strategies, that is something that I knew to my core. If my teachers were having a ton of behaviors going on in the classroom, meaningful learning wasn't going to occur, right? So what was it that we could do proactively to make sure that we are mitigating that? Or is there, something as a decision was made that was poor that we could do as administrators to make sure that we are teaching the behaviors and, fixing the harm that was caused by the actions? So for myself, I'm going to go back to what I said about the relationship action team. Unfortunately, the acronym is called RATS, not something that I loved, but it was what it was. And it was kind of a funny term. But the RATS group really was constructed because I couldn't do it by myself. Talking about that burnout piece, right? I'm not Superman. I can't do it by myself. I needed more people. So I needed to find folks that were like-minded and wanted to learn. So with that RATS group, we had three things that were implemented and kind of rules for the group, right? So one was you had to be open-minded. Obviously, everyone has their own experiences, their own biases, things that they bring with them that were going to be at the meetings. What we asked was leave it at the door. Whatever those things were that you had as far as preconceived ideas about student discipline, please just come with an open mind. That was the first thing. Second thing was whatever someone brought to learn about, we were going to implement it into the educational environment. So if it was a classroom teacher, they're going to do it in their classroom. If I was an administrator, I was going to try and find some way in my role to implement it, right? Last thing was if the implementation worked, we saw a benefit from it, we were going to keep it and continue with that strategy through the rest of the year. Secondary piece to that was that we're going to share it with a peer, ask them to do the same thing, teach them about it, and then invite them into the RATS group. So we started with like 7 folks, and this was just a small mixture of myself as administrator, counselor, and a bunch of teachers, right? By the end of the school year, and this was mid-year, we had almost half our staff a part of this RATS group, which I'm super proud about. I will also say, because it was a grassroots movement, I think it had more power, right? It wasn't me as the administrator coming in saying, you have to do this. We all know how that would be perceived. It was a peer saying, hey, I've got something that worked with student behavior. And what other teacher would not want to learn more about that, right? We all want our students to behave, and we want to make sure that we're having good relationships with our kids. So second year, as far as implementation, it was easy because the majority almost was already starting to work through these practices to say, okay, now this is a campus initiative. We're as a entire group going to learn about it. Most of the folks, if they weren't a part of the RATS group, they had heard about it. They knew what was going on the campus. And some of them may have even tried some strategies, even though they didn't attend the actual meetings, right? The other piece too, I think you had talked about alternative discipline. I think for me, it was mostly trying to find ways that I could, and I can't do this again alone. I had to have a team of people, and I empowered. And as an administrator, you can do this. You can empower other people to take on different tasks, right? So you had talked about restorative practices, right? We had folks that were trained specifically on how to run a restorative circle. We did things in the classroom as far as the proactive pieces to model what a restorative practice would look like, but we call them relationship circles. It was non-threatening questions about what they like to do, but the system that was encompassing in that relationship circle actually was the same as what happened in a restorative circle. It just looked a little bit different, right? And so when they had to do a restorative circle in a situation where they were repairing harm, it wasn't a foreign concept because they had done something like this similar in the classroom. The other piece too is that alternative discipline is the discipline or the consequence that's being provided actually connected to the action of the student. And too often that's not the case, right? Let's talk about elementary school. A kid does something wrong, you lose recess. Well, does that connect to the behavior or the action that occurred that was negative? No. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that are still occurring with you have to write 100 sentences about what you're not going to do in the future. Is that connected to the behavior that was exhibited that was negative earlier? But I can assure you that they're going to hate school on those two things. And it's not solving the behavior moving forward. We're not teaching them the correct way in the same situation. We're probably going to, unfortunately, see a repeat action of the negative behavior. So I can go on for a really long time on this, but I think the main components is the student taking ownership of the negative action. Are they repairing the harm, either physically as I broke something, I need to fix it, or as it a broken relationship that needs to be fixed? And the last thing is the teaching piece. Is there a teaching component of what needs to occur in the future so that we're really focused on the individual in the future? Is are they being a responsible and productive individual, which we both know will result in adulthood. So if they're potentially and most likely not going to learn it at home, or maybe they're learning at home, but they also need the support of the school to then enhance that to make sure that they abide by the rules. But then also we're not focused just purely on the compliance piece. We're also looking at, are they understanding the value of why they're supposed to do this in the future?
Joshua, I know when this episode comes out, I'm going to be going back and listening to this a few times because there's so much in there to just take in as a sponge, absorb, and start to unpack. But one thing that's really standing out to me in your message is the need to be proactive.
Yep.
When you are taking a kid's recess away, when discipline is coming in the form of an in-school suspension, that's a reactive consequence.
For sure.
You need to go out of your way to build the relationship first, and maybe that's also why Rat's movement took off so well. It might have not been necessarily that it came from the bottom up. It might have been that it was a proactive movement.
Yep.
It was done because there was a need that was identified and a response was initiated to it before it became a problem.
Yep.
Right. And because of that, it was able to become a movement. You sold the why behind it. You got some buy-in on it and it took off on you, which is so incredible to hear. Being proactive sounds like a lot of work, but it actually saves you a lot of time.
Oh my gosh.
It saves you a lot of headache. It saves you a lot of stress. From an administrator myself, I know whenever I'm proactive, I can tell the weeks that I have not been proactive. Sure. Because I'm putting out fires a lot more. Right. And so the need to be proactive is imperative because it sets you up for success. Now, sticking to that theme of change, as the director of innovation for the Teach Better team, what innovative practices are you introducing to enhance this experience, and have they impacted student outcomes?
Yeah. Okay. Can I go back though, Tyler, real quick? I want to talk about time, if you don't mind.
Let's talk about time.
Okay. So I saw somewhere where it talked about good at something requires time, right? If you want to be a good husband or a good wife, you're going to spend time two ways, right? If you don't take the time to build into that relationship, you are going to take the time in the fights and the negative relationship that's occurred between your spouse, right? Same thing with a parent, same thing with a teacher, same thing with administrator. And what you just talked about with, if I'm not being proactive, I'm now having to put out a bunch of fires. Well, you are taking the time to deal with student discipline and student behavior. Where would you rather spend your time? Would you rather spend it on the proactive piece where I'm trying to make sure that I'm building a relationship and put some things in place so that I don't have to put out fires? Or are you going to decide to not be proactive and then spend your time having to then go back and teach the behavior and do all those other steps? Now, everything that I had talked about does require time because students are not perfect. Students are going to make decisions that they're not supposed to. However, would you rather spend more time as a staff doing the proactive stuff, which I will agree is more fun, or would you rather have to then deal with the back end of it? You're going to spend time regardless. It's just a matter of where you're going to put it. So I just want to make that point before I answer the question that you just asked.
One of them is going to take more time.
For sure.
I'll leave that part at that. One of them will take more time.
Yeah, I know. I've spent way too much time on student discipline, but all right. You had asked about how I'm making change, correct? Or impacting student outcomes. Yes.
Absolutely. As the director of innovation now.
Yeah. So my role is fun because it's about change, right? And understanding what that looks like on a campus. So yeah, I do a lot of coaching. I work with a lot of leadership teams, but obviously my main focus is what we've really been overarching talking about today, which is just with student discipline. I'm currently writing a book with Charlie Peck through Connected Publishing called The Language of Behavior. It's all about this, right? About what's truly going on in the lives of our kids, the basis behind it, and then to decode to understand that. And I really dislike this, but unfortunately, too many kids get labeled. Oh, that's just a bad kid, right? And that's not the truth. We know that. When I speak to school districts all the time, I had a slide where I've got these. It's kind of like Wheel of Fortune, right? You got the letters that turn, and there's blanks. Well, unfortunately, as individuals, we tend to put negative things to fill the blanks, right? And so the funny thing about it is that if you fill in the negatives, it actually will be curse words that are on the screen. However, when I turn the slide over, it's actually words that are spelled differently that are not curse words, right? But that's what happens with our kids. We only get bits and pieces, right? And it's an unsolved puzzle. And then we start to just shove things in there, and typically that they're negative about the student. And then we have this whole perception about who they are as an individual. When we start to uncover what's truly going on, we find out that there's been a huge adversity in their life, and the behavior that we're seeing is really a reflection of what's hurt inside of them, right? And so for myself, I think most of my work is really about the trauma responsive stuff and the student behavior. Obviously, as the Teach Better team, we provide a lot of PD in a lot of different areas, but that's typically my focus is really about the relationship side of things, because like we said, if student behavior is not taken care of, no learning is going to occur. So what are some systems that we can change? And I love working with teams about that. And what does that alternative discipline look like? Because when you look at a typical student discipline matrix, it's very concrete. It's A equals B as far as this is the behavior and this is always the punishment. And every child is different. And so why is our discipline matrix so cookie cutter? If a child has just the most perfect perfect background as far as being raised, they have a huge support system, all of their needs are being met, and they make a mistake. Okay, maybe a detention would be enough to change the behavior for the rest of their life. But then you have a child that maybe is homeless, or maybe they don't know if they're going to be fed that night, or maybe they're bouncing around from home to home, being passed amongst different family members, and they don't know where they're sleeping that night. There's a lot of other experiences that we have to look at in regards to our schools, and sometimes even like homework and like the equity piece to that. And there's a lot of conversations that come from this. Even just does every teacher have a bottle of water for a kid or food in their classroom? And sometimes it's a trigger for some teachers because that's not my role in schools. Well, but if it'll affect learning in a positive manner, wouldn't you want to make that change? Same with the pencil, right? Some teachers want to have a massive massacre in the hallway for all the students that don't have a pencil when they show up in their classroom. I'm like, well, just give them a pencil. Okay. And if I need to provide that for you to make that successful, it's such a minor hill to die on for a kid to be successful in your class. Potentially, can we make this not only a learning opportunity, but then also a relationship building opportunity? And I think we just lose focus of that so much. So for myself, it's the same as what I was as a teacher. It's the same as what I was an administrator. It is, what are we doing to make sure that our kids are running into the building, to making it in an environment that you are welcome, you are loved, and you are wanted. And unfortunately, there's too many times where kids don't feel either of those three things.
And no one is born evil. No one is born angry. I mean, my kid came out crying, so they were just born scared.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yep.
But that being said, you need to recognize as well that when there is behavior, and maybe it's not a classroom setting, when there's behavior in adults, it's usually in the form of misdirected
Yep.
anger. And that's your biggest indication that somebody is dealing with some heavy adversity.
For sure.
That air element is swirling around and they need to connect. And it's up to us to build that connection. And you mentioned it yourself. What hill are we willing to die on? Right? There's kids that will come to school every day and seek out conflict
Yep.
because conflict is comfort,
It's attention.
because that's what's happening everywhere else in their life.
Yep.
It's attention.
Yep.
Such a powerful message on implementing changes, really getting into the why and seeking to learn, seeking to understand, and then taking some action and then taking some suggestions and doing that collaboratively
Mm-hmm.
is the message I'm hearing. It's very important. Now, Joshua, FIRE embodies decision making and risk taking. What's been one of the riskiest decisions you've had to make in your educational career?
Well, I mean, obviously, when you are passionate about something that you want to implement, and I know I've talked specifically about student behavior, but I mean, I was really passionate about standards-based grading and the way that we assess kids. I know for myself, I had a lot of anxiety before a quiz or a test, and I didn't perform very well. But it wasn't a true reflection for myself as a student. So if I was given an opportunity, which wasn't very often in the 90s, but every once in a while I would give an opportunity to do a project or find other ways to communicate mastery of the content, I outperformed that. So, are we providing those opportunities in classrooms? I also talked about future ready skills. I was very passionate about that. In fact, once I gave a speech about just jobs in general that don't exist. At this time, AI wasn't even invented, or it wasn't something that was, staged that is right now. But I was talking about drone pilots and how there was a need for that. And the content that's in the classroom. I know everyone thinks like their content and what they're teaching is the most important thing possible, but also are there skills that we're preparing kids for jobs that we don't know exist, right? And I had a teacher that followed me after that. I was real passionate. I stood on a chair and I literally gave a TED talk to my staff because I was just kind of frustrated in the moment. But he followed me in and he sat me down and he was like, I just want to let you know that I love the passion behind what you're saying. But I also want you to know you're new to the campus and everyone thinks you're full of shit. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, he and I already had established a relationship, so I wasn't offended by
Yeah.
that. I actually appreciated the feedback that I was receiving. So what I knew was I had to prove myself. They didn't have a relationship with me. They didn't know who I was, right? All they had right now was that I spoke passionately about something and I wanted to make change. That's literally all I knew. So for me, it was about breaking down the wall, right? Of okay, some people think I smile too much. Some people think I walk too fast. Some people, and this is all feedback I receive. So I'm not just like making stuff up. This is truly what folks said, when I first got there. They thought I was potentially fake because they didn't know that I had a energetic just persona. They thought it was all about being on a stage and just this is who I want people to think about. I also needed to prove that I was genuine, that I truly wanted to know about themselves. I truly want to know what were their problems, how can I assist? Sometimes people ask these questions, but like you said before, right? For those kids that have trauma in their life, they can see through that. Well, staff too. I mean, for leadership, typically a principal is not on campus more than 3 years, the number's going down drastically, right? Same with assistant principals. We used to get moved all the time to different campuses. Some districts have it where you can't be on a campus more than 3 years as assistant principal before they move you on to somewhere else. So it's just this constant change. And so with that constant change, they also understand that the initiatives may not live longer than your presence. And also the passions and the things that are put, the procedures went on. I also had a teacher tell me, I'm going to outlast you. I don't have to do what you tell me what to do. Okay. And guess what? She was right. She's still on the campus. I'm not. So they understand too that, you know, it's really disheartening to build a really good, strong relationship with a leader when you know that they won't be there for much longer. So, for myself, any initiative, any passion, anytime I was doing anything, yeah, you're putting yourself out there because you'll have people tell you that you're wrong. You'll have people say, I'm not going to do that, or maybe I'll only do part of it. So as a leader, you're always putting yourself out there for people to have, an adverse reaction to what you're doing. And that goes not only with teachers, but with parents too. If you have a new initiative or something that you're putting in place with the classroom, and I'll go back to the standards-based grading. When we put that out there well, that's not real life. They're getting second chances, but in the real world, they won't get that, and then you got to have those conversations about, well, I can give you about 20 examples off the top of my head of where we get second chances, including the teacher exams. So, like, anyways, all that being said is, whenever you're putting any change onto a campus, you're going to put yourself up people to come back at you in various ways.
And let's go down the road of you're telling me doctors get medication right every single time. You're
Nope.
telling me plumbers don't have to come back ever again. You're telling me that your accountants never once missed something in filing a tax claim.
Driver's
Come
test.
on,
I mean,
people
I
make
can go on
mistakes.
and on.
Right. There are so many
Yeah.
here where mistakes are how people learn, and we need to embrace those mistakes and recognize that nobody's doing them on purpose. Nobody's doing them maliciously.
Yep.
They're doing them to foster improvement. And what's so strong about this change that you talked about, and I'm sure your staff eventually saw it, was when you were consistent with it, and once they saw that it wasn't a
Yes.
show and it was your earth and it was your value that you were really pushing. That's when you started to see the buy-in, because you can make I can sit here and make any decision I want. I can go to my staff tomorrow and say, hey, we're doing
Yep.
this. But if they don't know that it's rooted in something, if they don't know that it's rooted in what I believe in, and they're not aligned to what I believe in, it's not going to go anywhere.
Mhm.
So that teacher that comes up to me and says, I'm going to outlast you at this school, I'm going to say, that's great. But while you're here and while I'm here, let's align our values. Let's do something powerful, because that's our job.
Yep.
Let's do the best we can do. And then if you're going to outlast me, I go on my way. I sure hope when I'm gone and I connect with you and we bump into each other, how's it going? Where did it go?
Mhm.
What did you grow with? What did I grow with? That's the value in it. There's two ways we can look at those conversations. And what you're sharing is such an important piece to it. Now, Joshua, this is a bit of a heavy question. What are you hoping people action in their lives tomorrow from your message?
Oh, goodness. Well, I hope that they are empowered. Like I said before, I want folks to understand that regardless of your title and your situation, that you have an opportunity for change. So if you're sitting wherever you are listening and you're reflecting on your classroom, your campus, your district, and there's frustration. And no, I mean, goodness, a lot of things are going on in education that suck. And I'll be quite honest. I know there's a lot of problems that need to be solved. But is it one of those things where you just want to focus on the problem, or do you want to be a part of the change in the solution? And that's how I worked with my staff. That's what I do now. I think we have just the most phenomenal folks in education that are brilliant people. And I just want them to understand that they have an opportunity to hear yes. you know? So for instance, like when I was an administrator, I had people that would not have a solution because they had administrators in their past that shot them down every single time. And you talked about having to prove it and that consistency, which is huge. I also made it sure that they understood, if you have a solution about anything, you've seen a problem, you have a solution, come to my office. I will do my very best to say yes. And with that, Tyler, there were some crazy ideas. And I did my very best to say yes on every single one of them. Now, obviously, there's some things that the district would not allow, but I at least advocated for the solution. And some of the outcomes that occurred were beyond my wildest dreams. And I know if I tried to solve the problem myself, the outcome wasn't going to be as strong as what occurred, because that teacher had some off the wall idea. They implemented it and it just was amazing, right? On fire. So I want everyone to not only be the solution, or try to fix whatever adversity that they're going through, but I also want you to have some crazy ideas. And if you're an administrator listening, I want you to be a yes person, not a no person, because we hear no way too often in education.
Now, Joshua, what does your future look like?
It's evolving, man. I'm an open book. If you would have told me at any point I would have been a teacher, I would have said you're crazy. Then if you would have told me I was going to be an administrator, I would have said you're even crazier. And then if you would have said you're going to public speak, you're going to go all over the country, you're going to have a podcast, you're going to be an author, you're going to do all these other things, I would have been like, man, that's not even the realm of anything I do. So for myself, I just know that I don't have a plan. I'm evolving as we go. And I just want to make sure that I'm leaning into the values that I hold dear to whatever role I'm in. I am extremely passionate about education. I'm very passionate about making sure that we are making a difference in the lives of kids. And so whatever my role is, I want to continue to do that. And I also want to be a support system. I was a support as a teacher to my students. I was a support as an administrator to my teachers and my students. And now I'm doing that at a grander scale. And I'm super pumped about the future, about where I'm going, but I don't know. I just want to make sure that, whatever I'm doing, I'm doing within those core beliefs and values that I hold true.
Now, with all of these incredible things, I have to ask, how can people listening to this show get in touch with you?
Yeah. So, shoot, you can just email me, joshua@teachbetter.com, or, if you go to my website, joshdenver.com, you can fill out a form there too. And that's another way it goes right to my email. Shoot, I give you my phone number too. It doesn't really matter. I just want folks to connect in some way. And when I do this, if I keynote or I'm working with districts too, I do put my phone number up on the screen, because if you're in need, again, I want to be there with you, not as Luke Skywalker, as I said before, but as Yoda to assist and try to provide as much support as needed. But education sometimes can feel like you're on an island, and especially our classroom teachers, you feel like you're in a box and you're in a silo. And for me, it's like, hey, I want to collaborate with as much folks as possible. I want to beg, I want to steal, I want to take some initiative from someone else. And that's constantly what I did. Real quick, with an initiative, we did push-ins, is what it was called. I stole it from an administrator in St. Louis. And what it was an opportunity to keep students in the classroom. So I don't know about you, Ben, but like, I got so many calls on two things: either disrespect or getting everybody off task, right? And they're off task behaviors. These are low levels. Now, I would have teachers so upset, especially if it was consistent day by day, to kick the kid out of class. So I did an inventory, and I found out that we were losing thousands of minutes with our kids just on these two behaviors alone: disrespect and getting off task. So the push-in model was, okay, you can call the front office and just ask to do push-in. A coach, a counselor, administrator comes in the classroom, relieves you of that duty. So they're watching the classroom. You take 3 to 5 minutes, walk out of the class with a kid, do a little walk, get to the bottom of the behavior. What's truly going on, right? The language of behavior, like we talked about. Now, this solves a lot of things. One, it builds a relationship between the teacher and the student, which then doesn't have animosity toward the administrator later on, because the teacher is upset that the administrator gets to build that relationship and they don't, right? Then they also feel like they're not getting communicated with the true problem, what's going on that manifests the behavior. Then the student and the teacher go over their expectations and have an agreement to have the student go back into the classroom to change the behavior. And what we found was this resolved most, if not all, of the low-level behaviors. Students now still with the expert, they're still with their peers, still in the education environment and succeeding, and we're taking away thousands. We literally took away thousands of minutes just by alleviating a low-level infraction, building a relationship, and having someone else relieve the teacher. So did I make that up? Nope. That's not my system. I am not the owner of that, but I stole it, right? That's that collaboration piece. So that's what I want to do. I want to be able to be a collaborator. I want to be able to provide resources. I want to be able to send you somewhere else. Maybe it's even talking to someone else that isn't myself as the expert. So if you hear anything you want more information on, of course, you can reach out. I will try my very best to support you in that.
Well, alchemists, what an incredible journey we just went on with Joshua. If you haven't checked out Aspire to Lead, make sure you do, and make sure you stay tuned for his upcoming book through Connected Ed. We will link all of that in the description of this podcast. Joshua, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Oh my goodness, it was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Ty.
You've been listening to The Elemental Educator. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Elemental Educator.